So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, excited to actually continue our tafsir for the fifth day. Let's just look at some of what we had done last time and just see what we talked about. So, here we go. We were talking about this ayah right there. فَلَنَقُصَّنَّ عَلَيْهِمْ بِعِلْمٍ وَمَا كُنَّا غَائِبِينَ. And we talked about the word sa being the root for فَلَنَقُصَّنَّ. And we also talked about the فَلَنَقُصَّنَّ. We said that the word sa basically the root actually means to cut something or to cut through something, making when you also mean to storytell, to tell a story, to inform you. So right here, فَلَنَقُصَّنَّ عَلَيْهِمْ بِعِلْمٍ, it's like there's going to be like a cut through, or at least it's going to, on Judgment Day, you will be informed about everything that you had committed. In other words, what your book of deeds contain. So therefore, فَلَنَقُصَّنَّ عَلَيْهِمْ بِعِلْمٍ, it is basically to warn the disbelievers and the believers to be basically very considerate over the day of accountability, and therefore present what is going to be something in their favor on Judgment Day. So that is faranakusan. We also said the letters fa and fa. They're basically to be more of the letter in addition, or to mean in addition, or to also mean to give further explanation. In other words, another commentary. فَلَنَقُصَّنَّ عَلَيْهِمْ بِعِلْمٍ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically has the knowledge and the complete knowledge of everything that was committed, and therefore none can claim that it was in any shape or form on Judgment Day, that this isn't necessarily what they had done, because they have cameras recording and certainly voice notes and all the different things that were basically accompanying their will is also going to be exposed. So everything accompanying their will to do, to hear, to listen, to see something, etc., is all going to be by the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala / by the supervision, by the ilm of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's basically going to be something that will stand in that trial, in that accountability on Judgment Day. وَمَا كُنَّا غَائِبِينَ, and we were not absent. We said غائبين, the root is غاب, which basically means to be absent. So غائبين, we were not absent, and we commented on the we to meaning a plural pronoun, and we said that this in Lugha Arabiya is to present honor, and certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ليس كمثله شيء. There's nothing like unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-wahid. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one, and certainly not plural. وَالْوَزْنُ يَوْمَئِذٍ الْحَقِّ. This is where we left off at. But when we talked about وَالْوَزْنُ يَوْمَئِذٍ الْحَقِّ, we went in some details, because when it says وَالْوَزْنُ, this is talking about the scale. This is talking about the weight. This is talking about how the accountability will be based on truth. But the accountability, or at least al-wazn, to actually not refer to accountability only, but certainly this is talking about accountability. But وَالْوَزْنُ يَوْمَئِذٍ الْحَقِّ literally would mean that this is talking about a weight of something. And we also talked about in a commentary in regards to what al-Dhahhak and al-A'mash had done. Let's just talk a little bit about what was said. And they basically said, well, وَزْنُ يَوْمَئِذٍ الْحَقِّ is actually referring to justice, is referring to accountability, which certainly carries within it some form of a figurative or a metaphorical interpretation, which certainly al-Qushayri, along with, so right there, al-Qushayri, along with al-Qurtubi, they objected to it and they said, well, if we will be doing this type of metaphorical explanation or interpretation, we're going to find ourselves giving a different also explanation to perhaps Jannah, hellfire, and perhaps maybe even shayateen, and say that they're just evil spirits or just evil, some evil evil will or anything like that. And certainly that will get out of what the Prophet ﷺ basically explained. The Prophet ﷺ said it was a scale, as mentioned in the different ahadith, and we had seen some of those ahadith specifically in Sahih Muslim, but it's not just the only one. But we see in a number of different hadith and numerous hadith and numerous texts actually giving us this clarification that it is actually al-mizan to mean a specific scale. When we're speaking about sirat, this is not whatsoever to mean some kind of a metaphorical thing that is out there or feeling or whatever it is, but it is actually a real sirat, a real bridge that people will be walking on. And certainly, الشياطين and al-jinn are not going to be referring to some kind of an illicit behavior or some kind of bad, evil ethics, but this is actually referring to real shayateen and jinn and real creatures living. Al-malaika are certainly not some kind of a good force out there, but is actually a real creature with wings and so forth. Now, going for Sahih Muslim, we basically talked about this hadith where the Prophet ﷺ basically or at least Ibn Umar had said that he had heard the Prophet ﷺ actually speak about some real books or real books that contain the recordings of people's deeds will basically be exposed on Judgment Day, and it will actually be put on the scale. So therefore, not a metaphorical thing, but an actual presentation of an actual piece of material that will be there on Judgment Day. All right, we left off on this one. Let's see, Rawa ibn Majah, but I would like to say, when I say fi Sahih Muslim, this is to indicate that this hadith is authentic. But when you look at this one, for example, and here he basically indicated, he said ruwiya, which basically is usually to give an indication that something is probably not containing the level of authenticity that we would like it to hold. So therefore, he gave it in this type of sigha, in this type of part of speech that is indicating that this is basically a passive verb, a passive verb to basically show that it is not necessarily authentic, and which is why you could see in the footnote right there. Let me first comment on what hadith are we talking about. That there is a hadith that the mizan for some of the children of Adam might actually show that and that the amount basically is poor. In other words, it's weak. They don't have enough good deeds. And then on Judgment Day, there will be a raq maktub, so more like a scribed note that has La ilaha illallah, which is put on the scale. It makes it heavy. But we said, looking at the footnote, this was actually not something that we necessarily found to be authentic, and that's why they used the word لم نقف عليه بهذا اللفظ. In other words, in this particular way of saying it, he could not find it in this exact wording. But there are some notes that actually say something similar that have some authenticity in them. Yeah, let's go ahead and see Ibn Majah right there. And Ibn Majah, he narrated a hadith from Abdullah ibn Amr. Abdullah ibn Amr narrated a hadith that the Prophet ﷺ had said يصاح برجل من أمتي يوم القيامة على رؤوس الخلائق فينشر عليه 99 سجلا، كل سجل مد البصر. ثم يقول الله تبارك وتعالى: هل تنكر من هذا شيئا؟ فيقول: لا يا رب. فيقول: أظلمتك أظلمتك sorry كتبت الحافظون أظلمتك كتبت الحافظون؟ فيقول: لا. ثم يقول: ألك عذر؟ ألك حسنة؟ فيهاب الرجل فيقول: لا. فيقول: بلى، إن لك عندنا حسنة، وإنه لا ظلم عليك اليوم. فتخرج له بطاقة فيها: أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله. فيقول: يا رب، ما هذه البطاقة مع هذه السجلات؟ فيقول: إنك لا تظلم. فتوضع السجلات في كفة والبطاقة في كفة، فطاشت السجلات وثقلت البطاقة. All right, so you could see this hadith is narrated not only in Sunan ibn Majah, but in as well in Musnad Ahmad. But what does it say? I'm going to translate it spontaneously really quick. يُصَاحُ بِرَجُلٍ مِّنْ أُمَّتِي. On Judgment Day, a person from the nation of the Prophet ﷺ, that is, he's Muslim, it would be called upon on Judgment Day right before all the creation. And then 99 different books. In other words, we're talking about different recordings right there, and every single recording is as far as the eye could see. Then the Lord Almighty will say, do you deny anything of what is mentioned in here? And he would say, no, O Lord. So the Lord Almighty will say, أظلمتك كتبت الحافظون? Did my preserving angels, did they abuse you? Did they oppress you? In other words, did they do something that was not right? And then he would say, no. Then he would say, do you have any reasoning, excuse for what you had committed? Do you have a good deed? And he would say, no. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will say, but you have one good deed, and today you will not be oppressed. And then one card will be coming out, and it says, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh, where he had one day had said, I bear witness that there is no God worthy of worship, and Muhammad is the servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger. And he would say, oh Lord, what is this card in front of all these 99, basically, meaning all these 99 different recordings that they're basically just evidences that I had committed all these different things. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say, you will not be oppressed. In other words, you will not be rejected. In other words, you will be given even more. So all the different things that he had committed, all these 99 different notes basically, will be put on one scale, and the other basically card of La ilaha illallah will basically be put on the other side of the scale. Then the scales will basically go up, meaning what? They're actually not heavy anymore, and the scale of La ilaha illallah will supersede the weight of all of those 99 different recordings of all the different sins that were committed. And that's a hadith that we see, by the way. You can see that Tirmidhi added on to this. Well, it's not that he added on to it. In other words, he found a narration that basically adds more onto it. فَلَا يَثْقُلُ مَعَ اسْمَ اللَّهِ شَيْءٍ. So nothing will go beyond the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in its weight, in its value. And he said this is a hadithun hasanun gharib. in hadithun hasan is to basically indicate that it does actually have some level of authenticity, yet the wording is not necessarily in at its best. When you say gharib, that means that it's a specific definition for Tirmidhi himself, which is to indicate that he has a certain narration that no other narrators had necessarily picked up. All right, let's see. So he said there's going to be more to say in regards to this in Surah Al-Kahf. In Surah Al-Anbiya, we had already finished Surah Al-Kahf. So inshallah, you'll find it again in Surah Al-Anbiya. فَمَنْ ثَقُلَتْ مَوَازِينُهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. So whoever had their scale basically exceeding the weight and the good deed scale basically going the heaviest, and those are the people that are going to be successful. And وَمَنْ خَفَّتْ مَوَازِينُهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ بِمَا كَانُوا بِآيَاتِنَا يَظْلِمُونَ. And whoever's weight is basically the light weight. What weight are we talking about? We're talking about خَفَّتْ مَوَازِينُهُ بِالْأَعْمَالِ الصَّالِحَةِ. Whoever's weight of scale of good deeds is basically going to be lightweight. Those are the ones that had lost themselves for what they had committed. A couple things to say here. When you look at وَمَنْ خَفَّتْ مَوَازِينُ فَأُولَئِكَ الَّذِينَ خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُم. And then when it said فَمَنْ ثَقُلَتْ مَوَازِينُهُ, it said فَأُولَئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. It didn't say فَأُولَئِكَ الَّذِينَ رَبِحُوا أَنفُسَهُم. It said those ones were خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُم. But here فَأُولَئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ and not فَأُولَئِكَ الَّذِينَ رَبِحُوا أَنفُسَهُم. Why not? Let's see how we understand this. We're going to break it down first. So فَمَنْ ثَقُلَتْ, whoever, so if we were to put a punctuation here, punctuation mark here would be a semicolon, because it said وَالْوَزْنُ يَوْمَئِذٍ الْحَقِّ. Hold on, let's actually put that right there, okay? And let's put it right there, okay? We're going to say that semicolon is going to be giving me further explanation, and it is related to the first, basically, statement. وَالْوَزْنُ يَوْمَئِذٍ الْحَقِّ is a جملة اسمية. الوزن is basically the scale, and certainly what would weigh people's deeds. And on Judgment Day, it is going to be completely one, completely just. So therefore, just. And the other meaning for al-waznu yawma'idhin al-haq, in other words, no doubt that this will take place. So al-waznu yawma'idhin al-haq has two meanings. The first meaning, that there's no doubt that the whole matter of accountability in the physical description or the physical existence of the scale to weigh people's deeds, that it is actually true, that there's no doubt that this will happen and it will be true. And وَالْوَزْنُ يَوْمَئِذٍ الْحَقِّ could also mean al-haq, that this يَوْمَئِذٍ الْحَقِّ, that day is true and it is going to be inevitable, and certainly it will happen with no question. It will happen with no doubt. And the other meaning, وَالْوَزْنُ يَوْمَئِذٍ الْحَقِّ, to mean al-haq, that il-mizan itself is actually in the recording, and it will weigh injustice. That it will weigh injustice. So il-haq could be a description for al-wazn, to mean that this wazn is going to be just, and it could also be a description to yawma'idhin, to that day, meaning that that day for sure, there is no doubt that this day will come. So just understanding, I'm just trying to break down how scholars would actually describe the grammar of it. So I'm just breaking it down in a little bit more on more commentary. Let's see. So now we put the semicolon. فَمَنْ ثَقُلَتْ مَوَازِينُهُ, since this is the day of truth, since this mizan basically makes only true measurement, then فَمَنْ ثَقُلَتْ مَوَازِينُهُ, then whoever's scale is basically going to be heavier, or at least heavy. What is ثَقُلَ? ثَقُلَ means that it is basically heavy. That it is basically heavy. And فَمَنْ ثَقُلَتْ مَوَازِينُهُ, whoever's weight is basically the weight of the good deeds, and that is مَوَازِينُهُ. مَوَازِينُهُ meaning all the different weight, all the different things that they had weight. فَأُولَئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. فَأُولَئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. In other words, it was basically letting us know that the rush of that rushing their reward, that's the whole idea. Rushing the reward for those that deserved, basically their reward was going to be another reward. Let's do it this way. When you do good, in fact, the Prophet ﷺ had given us the adab, and he said, أعطوا الأجير أجره قبل أن يجف عرقه, or يجف عرقه. Okay? Give the worker or whoever is basically doing you any service, give them their stipend or their money basically before even their sweat would dry. In other words, they worked really hard for something. Give it to them as soon as possible, because that is part of giving them that comfort for all the different effort that they had done. Okay. Now, at the same time, even on Judgment Day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَأُولَئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ, to let them know that when they basically had their scale in exceeding in weight, basically the scale of good deeds, then right away there's going to be the complement. فَأُولَئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. Right away, the compliment comes in to say, you're going to be successful. You had made it. You will be making it to Jannah right on the spot. Yet, وَمَنْ خَفَّتْ مَوَازِينُهُ, whoever's scale is basically not heavy enough, in other words, it was lightweight in the good deeds, فَأُولَئِكَ الَّذِينَ خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُم. Those are the ones that had lost their own selves. Why lost their own selves? Why say خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُم? خسروا أنفسهم, and not perhaps maybe خسروا, that they had lost and that's it. Because it is the nafs. It is the nafs that basically was under your control, that you basically need to invest in. It is you and within your power to invest either in expanding it, in making it improve, or in degeneration. So when it said, فَأُولَئِكَ الَّذِينَ خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُم, that's also to indicate that they had a privilege to make it, and that is the nafs. So when nafs can be something that can help you basically win or can help you lose. Not everything about in nafs is necessarily evil. Certainly, it is part of our nafs, which is called in nafs al-lawwama or in nafs al-ammara bis-su', that may motivate you, that may drive you to doing what is wrong, but there's also nafs al-mutma'inna. So what is within this line, at least in the beginning, right there, فَأُولَئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ, that is to describe in nafs al-mutma'inna. Yet in nafs al-lawwama or in nafs al-ammara bis-su', فَأُولَئِكَ الَّذِينَ خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُم. They lost the privilege of what their own nafs could have done to basically save them, and they were the ones that were supposed to be driving their nafs towards what is right. بِمَا كَانُوا بِآيَاتِنَا يَظْلِمُونَ, for what they had basically done to the ayat. Hold on. So what does this look like? What does this mean? بما كانوا بآياتنا يظلمون. بما كانوا, for, of course, this is relating, well, why did they lose? Why did their nafs basically not get driven to the right direction? How did they lose their nafs? That's the question. How did they lose their nafs? Why couldn't they control their nafs? Why did their nafs lose its own momentum to direct it towards what is good? Is it their own nafs that drove them there? Or is it their will? Or is it, what comes first? So he said, بِمَا كَانُوا بِآيَاتِنَا يَظْلِمُونَ. There's a transgression that was committed. The transgression, and what defines the transgression? They were basically the ayat. The ayat were there to help you recognize the boundaries of what will channel your nafs towards the right drive, towards the right direction. In other words, what comes first? What motivates and what affects what? Your own behavior, your own actions, which basically is indicated in the word يظلمون. It's a verb. The verb is letting you know that there was an action taking place. The verb is to let us know that what affected the nafs is your own behavior. If you choose to put in a certain behavior in place, whether to see something, to listen to something, to speak in a certain way, to behave in a certain way, that will affect your nafs. It will affect the nafs, and then the nafs will little by little either get into the level of a nafs al-mutma'inna, or it will degenerate from a nafs al-lawama to a nafs al-ammara bis-su', and then you basically would empower your nafs or would degenerate and weaken your nafs based on your actions. So your actions have a lot to contribute or a lot to influence basically the nafs in what level of power it has over you. So if you want to look at it in a different way, when we speak about ways of discipline, there are two ways of discipline. There's one way of discipline by information and basically giving you lecturing, classes, giving you the ilm, giving you the wahi, but that's not enough. You can know all the information. You can, in fact, have probably aced all the information. But there's another thing that is your responsibility, which is the discipline. Let's put that in different areas, okay? In different areas, whether we're speaking about a government level or whether we're speaking about even a daycare level, okay? There's the level of education that the society is responsible to educate through the masajid, through the universities, through schools, through all of that. But that's one side. It's basically the side of education. We can inform you about it. We can explain, either explaining the consequences or explaining how good this is, or probably explaining the impact it has on you, and the list goes on and on. Or the second route is basically discipline. How do we discipline? So even you as a parent, it's not enough to tell your children about the importance of cleaning your room and the importance of hygiene, importance of brushing your teeth and all of that. It's not enough to give them some instructions, but there needs to be a level of discipline where you are overseeing the implementation of that particular good behavior. You as a parent, you need to see, can I see the homework? You claimed that you had done it. Let me see that, let me make sure and let me see that you had done it. You had claimed that you had cleaned your room. Go over there and actually see, oh, this needs to be cleaned. This needs to be wiped. This needs to be done this way. This is how you, and demonstrate sometimes, and sometimes they have to basically grow into reaching another milestone where they're capable of becoming adults to be independent on their own, to do the job without people telling them, to do the job without people giving them any instructions. And that's the same thing when we speak about discipline in akhlaq. It is basically the same way. Discipline in akhlaq. Are you capable of actually doing what is right and avoiding what is haram without your parent or without basically perhaps somebody telling you that you are being watched, or there are cameras, CCTV camera or whatever telling you that you're being watched? Are you really going to have your inner camera, your inner taqwa, your inner discipline basically control you or not? How do we get to that level? We get it through two different ways. Number one is al-ilm, by having the ilm, especially in the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the first one, especially in the names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number two, it's the discipline. What is discipline? You basically are wiring your brain, you're wiring your behavior to be committed to a certain manner, even when it is not being basically going to be accountable. When we speak about accountability, perhaps in a child's world, you're probably taking away maybe the privilege of entertainment, or maybe you're taking away maybe a privilege that is dear to them, etc. Then in that situation, discipline comes in by you removing, or you're probably punishing them by adding an extra chore, or probably adding an extra responsibility, because it is to add up in order to bring about the discipline. Now, same thing when you're talking about good deeds and bad deeds. There's one beautiful thing in the world of Sufism, is that there would be a sheikh who would oversee the mannerisms and the tazkiyah that the murid would be practicing. So the sheikh would basically see that the murid and may give them an extra chore of perhaps dhikr, an extra chore of perhaps doing certain behaviors in order to live up to that tazkiyah level and try to get them up to a higher maqam. What is a maqam? Maqam is like a stage. Okay, so now we understand. فَأُولَٰئِكَ الَّذِينَ خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُم, the word خَسِرُوا, that they had lost. But here's also one thing. When you look at فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ, it came in a plural, and this one came in يَظْلِمُون, that's plural, and خَسِرُوا is plural. But when it said أَنفُسَهُم, you could see it was basically letting us know that each and every single person, and this certainly is plural, but خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُم, they all had lost that particular test of winning. How? Well, بِمَا كَانُوا بِآيَاتِنَا يَظْلِمُونَ, because they had transgressed the borders that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had shown them, that they were limits to help them grow. In other words, when you talk about the ayat, when you talk about the different things in legislature, halal, haram, let's say makruh, etc., all of those limitations, they're basically places of guidance. So we can use the word limitation to explain a border, or we could also use another word to say they're areas of guidance. They're basically traffic signs to help you know when to proceed, when to go back, when not to cross, when to probably decide and weigh the odds and the odds and and the evens of things, and probably then decide, because this is optional. Then in that situation, we're looking at the halal, haram, and all of those signs are basically to indicate a place of guidance, to give you a GPS in life. It's a GPS in life. It is not a burden. Of course, certainly, atheism, and specifically no atheism, wanted to portray that all the different legislations and all the different things in relationship to religion are basically restricting your happiness. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that it is actually trying to pave the way to your happiness by giving you these markers to help you find the right path. So when you say بِمَا كَانُوا بِآيَاتِنَا, this is to indicate that those were markers, that the ayat were markers to help them find the right path. It was not a burden, and certainly it was not to make their life harder, but it was to make their life easier with direction. So when you look at يَظْلِمُونَ بِمَا كَانُوا بِآيَاتِنَا يَظْلِمُونَ, why did we say that this is to let us know that the behavior is what basically had driven the nafs? It's this bima. What is bima? Bima is to say that it is as a result and for such reason. So therefore, when you look at why did they lose themselves? Why did they lose their drives? How did they lose the grip over their drive? So the ayah says, okay, fair enough question. Here's Bima to explain it to you. So bima is to let us know that the reason to it is because they had transgressed the limitations, the places of guidance that the ayat, that the verses, that the wahi was basically helping them find as basically something that was going to guide them. So that was the result. And as a result, they could not hold their own nafs, but their nafs was holding them. وَلَقَدْ مَكَّنَّاكُمْ. Hold on. Let's look at, first of all, before we get past that, I think it would be fair to go for al-Qurtubi and just say what he wanted to say. He said, مَوَازِينُهُ is the plural of mizan. What is al-mizan? Mizan is one scale. And the root to it is Muzan, and then of course, those that learn Lugha Arabiya and those that know Lugha Arabiya would understand when we're talking about al-asl, or the root of it, and what the implication is. And of course, when we're talking about al-mawazin, are we necessarily talking about all the different mawazin? So does each and every single person have a scale on their own? Or is this one mizan and only one mizan, and people would have to pass through this one mizan? And Ali ibn Abi Talib, although right here Al-Qurtubi didn't mention that, but Ali ibn Abi Talib, he said, well, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was giving all these people all around the world and all throughout history the right numbering for the rizq, how could Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not have the power and not have the ability to give all and each and every single one basically a particular mizan? In other words, a particular mizan and a particular scale. And we know, just like Kate, even on our phones right there, we've got phones, and each one is charged at a certain thing, and we have also each one has a certain bank account, and it has a certain number of basically showing how much money is left inside, how much money was taken out, and how much basically is overdraft, and whatever it is. And if this is bashar, if these are human beings and they were capable of making such numberings and such accountability, why would we think that it would be impossible on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to basically give us the accountability even with more than just one scale? So is it mawazin to mean that there are many, many, many scales? Certainly, that's one description. And mawazin, is it one mizan or is it many mawazin? It's basically, wallahu a'lam, it is it is basically a number of different, so plural mizans. It's a number of different scales, and these scales each will basically, and that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He is asra'ul hasibin, that He is basically the fastest in holding people accountable, in measuring basically people's deeds, etc. It's basically right on the spot. We're ready now. All right, so this is just to keep us at least, with the wording and make sure that we understand this. And it was said that it was probably more than one mizan for one particular person. So in other words, looking like there's a mizan for your weight, and there's a mizan for perhaps maybe qira'at al-Quran, and another mizan for, I guess, raising your children, and another mizan was for the time that you were a teenager, and there's another mizan, and each one would basically have a certain mizan. Each one would basically have a certain scale. All right, is that the case? Allahu a'lam. Is it each and every single deed has its own scale? Allahu alam. But certainly we know if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given the human beings to have the capability to have different measurements, and we basically are capable of measuring so many different things, where we are capable of measuring speed, or measuring velocity, or well, speed is velocity, but measuring weight, measuring perhaps maybe power of something, different types of power too, whether it's in electricity or whether it's in probably power in horsepower, and basically in different types of power, or probably the power of the push of something, and the list goes on and on. We basically would study that in physics, but here, of course, we just know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of measuring the number of different things, whether it's the power of your iman, or the power of your Islam, or the power of your commitment, or the power of your sincerity, or the power of your focus. Yeah, your focus on salah, for example. Your focus on dhikr, your focus in class, your focus in this, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a way to measure all of that. Is that what the mawazin is? Perhaps. All right. And of course, it could also be one mizan, and yet in Lugha Arabiya, sometimes we can put in Lugha Arabiya something that is a plural, but it would actually be one. But that's to indicate sometimes the how intricate it is, how detailed, how sensitive it is, the scale, or sometimes it can also mean to that, of course, one mizan, but of course she's got her own weight, and the other person has his own weight, and the number 3, 4, every single person has their own weight. So therefore it would be mawazin, but one scale. It's one scale, but each one basically had their own weight. Okay, so at the end is that كذبت قوم نوح المرسلين كذبت عاد المرسلين. You would say, of course, even though كذبت is to actually use a singular word, but قوم نوح is plural, but they all had come with one lie. That is the rejection. So in Lugha Arabiya, you can have one thing basically describe a plural of people, or basically two. So when you say كذبت, this is singular. قوم نوح, that's plural. So did they all deny, or is it one person? Who and how many denied? All right, so it's the singular verb is to describe the plural of everyone's actions, but that is to basically indicate that it was one lie, but they all had agreed to the same lie and the same rejection. But at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically hold them accountable for the same exact behavior. And that's the same thing. كذبت عاد المرسلين, even though كذبت, like I said, singular, عاد المرسلين, basically right there there, this is talking about all the people of Ad, not just one. Okay, even though it was one prophet, but they all had committed the same bad deed. And of course, certainly, and that's why when we talked about number of different accountability, or at least number of different people getting weighed, that's when the other scholars basically said, well, this mizan is basically jam'u mawzun, that it is a plural of what was being weighed and not necessarily who was being weighed. What was being weighed, or is it who was being weighed? So not necessarily a plural of scales. At the end, we know that there's accountability, there's a scale, and certainly regardless, at the end, it's going to be whether you're weighed by one scale or whether each and every single person has multiple scales, or whether one person has, or each person has a scale. At the end of the day, we know that there's going to be accountability. That al-wazn yawma'idhin al-haq. That al-wazn on Judgment Day is basically weighing in truth. There's no doubt about it, and weighing in justice. Let's see. Ibn Abbas had said, توزن الحسنات والسيئات في ميزان له لسان وكفتان. That people will basically be held accountable. Their deeds and their bad deeds, their good deeds and their bad deeds, would basically be accountable, and there would be a scale where the scale would have a lisan. So it would basically have kind of like a, it's kind of, well, I mean, lisan means tongue, but this isn't talking about a tongue. This is talking about that there would be something like to hold with, and kaffatan, and to basically, what do they call that? Like to, what do they call that? Kaffa is like a, well, kaffa is a palm, but this isn't talking about a palm. The kaffa is like a plate, like two plates, okay? Like two plates. So, think of course, I mean, like two plates when you're talking about, let's say, mizan, right there. And then, okay, so here we go. This is looking at right
You mean
there.
two pan?
Two pans, exactly, like two pans. I guess here's pan number one, and well, two plates, two pans, or yeah. And then certainly it would basically weigh these two. In other words, how equal or how different in different weight. Okay, let's see. فَأَمَّا الْمُؤْمِنْ فَيُؤْتَى بِعَمَلِهِ فِي أَحْسَنِ صُورَةٍ. The believer will basically come in with their good deeds, basically coming in the best appearance. So what does the best appearance mean? Meaning أحسن صورة in the result. The result is he basically had the good deed come down and basically show that it was heavier than the bad deed. And فيوضع في كفة الميزان فتثقل حسناته على سيئاته. And then it would be put basically on that scale, and the good deeds would basically outweigh the bad deeds. And he said, this is the explanation. فَمَنْ ثَقُلَتْ مَوَازِينُهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. And yet, on the other hand, نسأل الله العفو والعافية, the deeds for the disbeliever will come in في أقبح صورة, in the worst appearance. What do you mean in the worst appearance? Is the book itself looking ugly? Or is the book itself basically showing that something is going to be basically not in, you can have a book that might look like it has a good cover, it has a, it's basically looking precious, and you can have a book that, like a scrapbook, and it's just, trying to erase, trying to put right, etc., like a scrapbook. So you can have some book that may have the best appearance, and another book may have the ugliest appearance. It's all messed up, all torn, all just not looking even at its best. And you can have a book that, looks so precious. It's a book and a book, but each book basically reflects what's in it. Okay, all right. فَيُوضَعُ فِي كَفَّةِ الْمِيزَانِ. And then it is basically put in a certain mizan. It is basically put on the scale, and then it would be weaker until they would basically fall in hellfire. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. Let's see right there. He
I
said,
have a question, Dr. Aisha.
go ahead, Zamzam.
So for the mizan, for the bad deeds, does it count the ones that have been forgiven if I say tawbah before I die?
So yes, certainly, dear, because التوبة تجب ما قبلها. التوبة erases everything that is before it. So if you had committed a sin and you made tawbah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just like when a person makes their shahada, just like a person makes their shahada, when they make their shahada, all right, all the different kufr that they had committed would basically get wiped and it would become basically good deeds. That's the same thing when you make tawbah. If you were to make tawbah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will wipe away all the bad deeds, and transform it into good deeds. All right?
Oh,
So
tawbah is a good gift then. Ya Rabbi, give us tawbah.
yes, absolutely. Tawbah is one of the best things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of His mercy had given us. Make tawbah. Do you have to make tawbah for each and every single every single wrong deed, or can you make a general tawbah? Ya Allah, I'm asking you repentance for all the different things that I had committed. Some scholars actually said you could do that, or other scholars they said no, each and every single one has its own tawbah. I lied on that day. I stole on the other day. I looked at the wrong thing the other day. I said what I shouldn't have said the other day, etc. I harmed someone the other day. And basically, make tawbah for each and every single one. Why? Because, of course, even when we're speaking about sin or sin, of course, there's a difference when you would come in and confess that sin, and between just coming in and just okay, all the bad deeds, but no, we're speaking about each and every particular one. That's why أبوء لك بذنبي وأبوء بنعمتك علي. Of course, this is to say I am here confessing and coming in to admit all the different bad deeds that I had committed. So أبوء بذنبي, is it one deed or is it all the different deeds? All right, is it one deed or is it all the different deeds? So certainly, bidhanbi is my bad deed, that's one. And the nubi is all the deeds. But at the end of the day, it is basically to indicate that one is confessing. And part of tawbah is that you would confess to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not to the shaykh, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what you had committed. And if you needed to go to a scholar to stay as anonymous as possible and only let the sin be exposed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or at least between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't let others know about it. All right. Let's see. فيوضع في كفة الميزان فيخف وزنه حتى يقع في النار. Let's see. Right here he said أورده الواحدي في الوسيط. أخرجه بنحوه البيهقي وفي إسناده الكلبي وهو متهم بالكذب كما في تقريب التهذيب. Okay, let me explain what this means, because remember, mashallah, you ladies are advanced, so we need to make sure that we understand what is actually said in the footnote. He said al-Wahidi had mentioned it in al-Wasit. Basically, this is volume number, this is page number, all right? And al-Bayhaqi fi Shu'ab. Shu'ab, his book is called Shu'ab al-Iman. It's a book of hadith, a couple volumes, but and sometimes it's put in one volume. But anyhow, all right, in page 282, that is al-Bayhaqi basically mentioned it. Al-Bayhaqi is Shafi'i madhab, just a note. And in that chain of narration, al-Kalbi, there's a particular person, his name is al-Kalbi, and in Taqrib al-Tahdhib is, well, it's a summary for Tahdhib al-Tahdhib, and Taqrib al-Tahdhib is basically a book of chain of narrations. It was done by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, meaning where? He's from Gaza, okay? Or Al-Asqalan and Gaza, they're just a couple miles away. Okay, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani had mentioned that this al-Kalbi is accused of making up lies. Just of this particular information about him made the scholars be in doubt of the authenticity of this note or this athar. Why did we call it an athar? Because that's what was attributed to Ibn Abbas and not necessarily the Prophet. Al-athar is a note that traces all the way back to a sahabi. Al-hadith is a note that traces all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ. Okay, let's see. And he said, وَفِي الْخَبَرِ. Hold on, وَمَا أَشَارَ إِلَيْهِ. Let's see, right there. Al-Qurtubi wanted to say, despite probably he had known that his note wasn't necessarily authentic, but he said, قريب مما قيل. Or ما أشار إليه ابن عباس قريب مما قيل, that is close to what was said. Let's see. يخلق الله تعالى كل جزء من أعمال العباد جوهر فيقع الوزن على تلك الجواهر ورده ابن فورق or ابن فورق. And okay, let's see. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created every single deed. There's a core to it. Jawhar is a core. And then this core or al-wazn basically affects the core. In other words, the core of that particular deed is what will be basically weighed. And fil khabar, when you see al-khabar basically letting us know that there was a note, either a hadith or an athar. إذا خفت حسنات المؤمن. When a believer's deeds are basically light in weight, the Prophet ﷺ had said that there would be a bitaqa kal-anmala, that there would be kind of like a cord, a small card, and then that would be put in the right side of the scale, which basically has his good deeds, and then the good deeds would basically overweigh the bad deeds, and then فيقول ذلك العبد المؤمن للنبي بأبي أنت وأمي ما أحسن وجهك وما أحسن خلقك فمن أنت فيقول أنا محمد نبيك وهذه صلواتك التي كنت تصليها علي وتصلي علي قد وفيتك قد وفيتك So وفيتك أحوج ما تكون إليها. Or can it also be وفيتك? Even though right here, you want to keep in mind, sometimes the ones that put the علامات التشكيل can sometimes make mistakes. Okay? Just keep that one in mind. Okay, قد وفيتك أحوج ما تكون إليها. Shouldn't it be وفيتك?
Yeah, because Muhammad speak about.
Right, because if he's the one that's talking, قد وفيتك, that's probably even better. Yeah, since he was the one that's talking. Okay, let's explain what this hadith is basically saying. Okay, so let's see. So the believers' deeds were basically put on the scale, and then the good deeds were basically stronger and heavier, and then the believer will say, of course, there's this bitaqa, this card, that's a card that is going to be put and added onto the good deeds. That's what would make the scale in good deeds overweigh the bad deeds, and then the believer would look at this servant that is basically the Prophet ﷺ, and he would say, by the person that I would sacrifice my father and mother to, you have a beautiful face, you look very beautiful, who are you? And he will say, I am your Prophet Muhammad, and sallallahu. And this is the salawat that you used to do. What is salawat? Salawat meaning not prayers. but prayers that you did for the Prophet ﷺ, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, or Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad, or sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad, or salawatullah alayhi wa sallam. That all of that was going to be basically coming in as a form of dhikr. So even if you were to say sallallahu alayhi Muhammad, or alayhi salatu wassalam, or Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad, all of that would be considered as a salawat ala Rasulullah. That would come in on Judgment Day and outweigh the bad deeds when it would be just put as a card on the scale. And then certainly mention basically this bitaqa. And of course, when you say bitaqa, is it like a card, or is it some kind of a parchment paper type of thing, or what kind of a card is it? You know, in some areas they might call a card, or they might call it as that bitaqa to mean something like a card, and others to mean like a ruqa, kind of like a paper manuscript or something like that. At the end is that we just know that it was actually something that was written, regardless of what this looked like. Okay, let's see. Hudhayfa. Who's Hudhayfa? Hudhayfa is Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman, الصحابي, the known Sahabi. He basically said, صاحب الموازين يوم القيامة جبريل عليه السلام. He said the person that will be on let's say on as the person to be in responsibility over al-mawazin is going to be Jibril alayhi salam. And then he will be told, Ya Jibril, zin baynahum. فَرُدَّ مِنْ بَعْضٍ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will tell Jibril, weigh them, or weigh things, and you know what? It's like saying, even things out. وَلَيْسَ ثَمَّ ذَهَبٌ وَلَا فِضَّةٌ. And certainly there's no gold and no silver to somehow use as a currency, but if a person that is oppressing somebody, then they will be losing some of their good deeds, and then it would be given to the person that was abused. And if a person did not have good deeds, then the evil person or the oppressor will basically lose some of their good deeds, and it will be given to the person that was abused. And same thing, if they didn't have any good deeds, then some of the bad deeds that the abused one basically already had, it will be given to the person that committed that oppression. Nas'Allah al-afwa al-afiyah. You know, it's, oh ya Allah. All right, let's see. Who was the one that narrated this? At-Tabari. But there's one thing, is that في إسناده عبد العزيز ibn Aban al-Umawi. Imam Ahmad had basically determined that he was not going to take care of his hadith. وقال فيه ابن معين كذاب خبيث يضع الحديث. And the reason to it, he said that in that chain of narration, that there's Ibn Ma'in, and he called him kadhab, liar, khabith, very slick, and that he was making up and fabricating a hadith. And you could see تهذيب التهذيب. This is for Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. تهذيب التهذيب and تقريب التهذيب. تقريب التهذيب is really a summary of تهذيب التهذيب. تهذيب التهذيب, it's a book in almost 10 volumes, 9-10 volumes, and then تقريب التهذيب is in 2 volumes. تقريب التهذيب is a summary of this, okay? And تهذيب التهذيب is a summary of a big book. It's called تهذيب الكمال, and that's almost in 36 volumes. So just imagine that. And تهذيب الكمال, okay, is for المزي. Okay. روي عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أن الله تعالى, hold on, let's see number 1 first. And hold on, I should actually continue with this. And he said, والصحيح في باب رد المظالم عن أبي هريرة من كانت له مظلمة، قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: من كانت له مظلمة لأحد من عرضها أو شيء فليتحلله منه اليوم قبل أن لا يكون دينار ولا درهم. إن كان له عمل صالح أخذ منه بقدر مظلمته، وإن لم تكن له حسنات أخذ من سيئات صاحبه فحمل عليه. Okay, so what did he want to say? So the person that basically reviewed the book, he said, well, actually, there is a hadith in regards to the scales and whether whether an oppressor would lose his sayyi'at or his bad deeds, and it will be put upon the abuser if he didn't have any good deeds. Basically, if the abuser didn't have any good deeds to give to the abused one, then we'll basically take from the bad deeds that the abused one would have and just put it over the abuser. Okay, where's the evidence? And he said, well, there is a hadith which we could say is in Sahih Muslim, in Imam Musnad Ahmad, etc. And there's the hadith al-Muflis al-Mashhur. Man al-Muflis, and he said, whoever, al-Muflis is the bankrupt person. That, and this hadith is basically famous. Al-Muflis, the bankrupt person, is the person that would come in and with basically be held accountable. With that accountability, they might actually come in with a lot of good deeds, but then they swore at this person, they hit that person, they took the property of another person, then what this person, even though he came with a lot of Qiyam Layl, with a lot of Quran, with a lot of this and this, but they will get deducted in order to make up as a compensation for others. And then they would be bankrupt. So all the good deeds that they had come with, certainly they came with a lot of Qiyam Layl, they came a lot with dhikr, they came a lot with reading Quran, but then they lost all of it because they had a lot to compensate, and a lot was deducted from their good deeds in order to give it to the other person. Okay, let's see. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever has a madlamatun li ahad. What is al-madlama? In other words, if you had abused someone, if you had wronged someone, then whether this is about their reputation or this is about them, you swore at them, you talked evil about them, this basically harmed their honor, or anything else. So let them come. That is the Prophet telling them. So let them come to basically get that compensation, because on Judgment Day, there is no dinar and no dirham. In other words, there's no money to pay in a compensation on Judgment Day. There's only one currency. And basically, if a person had good deeds, then it will be taken from them to basically compensate the person that they had abused. And if the person did not have good deeds, then in that situation, the bad deeds from the other person, that is the one that was abused, even though he called them sahibo, he just called him his friend. But this isn't talking about, a friend, but this is to say the person that they had wronged at that moment. The person that they had basically harmed them at that moment, they will then be compensated either by removing some of the abused one's bad deeds and be put on the scale of that person that was supposed to be the good person, but he was also a zalim. I thought he was good. How can he be good and be a zalim at the same time? Don't think of people doing a lot of good deeds. The person that comes to me is Fir'aun right now. It was said that Fir'aun, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had delayed. The hadith is not authentic, okay? That says the note that I'm saying, but it's something that was mentioned in al-Athar. Okay, that Fir'aun, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala delayed punishing him, or at least bringing in the punishment in dunya for 40 years, even though Prophet Musa alayhi salam was making dua, etc., but delayed it for a long time because Fir'aun was good to his mother. So somebody can be good to their mother. Somebody can be good to their mother, but then they may cancel out some good deeds by committing other bad deeds. You know, a lot of people that maybe they're excellent to their mother. They're excellent to when it comes to akhlaq. But then when it comes to their salah, they're probably not the best at it. When it comes to their siyam, maybe not the best at it. They're very good on one end, but then they've got some shortcomings on the other. All right. So that's one thing, is that just to keep that in mind when he said sahibuhu. It's not his friend, but it's just to remember that even if somebody wronged you, they may actually be, this isn't to say, be naive, but even when somebody wrongs you on Judgment Day, you will be coming in both, and it will be a face-to-face accountability. This person that wronged you may be the person to get you out of hellfire. Yeah, they wronged me. How are they going to get me out of hellfire? Guess what? Their good deeds might be what will give you that compensation on Judgment Day without you realizing, which is important to keep in mind, because trauma, all right, when you're looking at trauma is a serious matter. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that certainly there may not be accountability in this life for that person that inflicted evil or pain on you or harmed you in any way. Maybe in this dunya they can get away with it, but on Judgment Day, there's going to be accountability. And certainly, Islam is asking you not to lose your akhlaq because of another person probably harming you, especially when it comes to parents. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِن جَاهَدَكَ عَلَى أَن تُشْرِكَ بِمَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ فَلَا تُطِعْهُمَا وَصَاحِبْهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. Especially when it comes to parents. Even when they had wronged you, do not think that you have the justification to harm your parents, or perhaps maybe fight them back, even if they had probably pressured you to leave Islam. Parents are a different scale. No, it is not al-ayn bil-ayn. It is not as we would say in different situations, hey, al-mu'amala bil-mithal, not with parents. With parents, there's no al-mu'amala bil-mithal. You have one responsibility with parents, is to live up to birr al-walidain level. Not, oh, well, they were not so nice to me. You know what? I'm not going to be nice back because they were not at that level. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that, no, that scale of you somehow thinking that, yeah, they didn't give me the best life when I was young, they didn't pay my mother child support, etc. Well, they failed their exam, but that doesn't mean you would be the one to put them on trial or judge them. That's not your job. Your job is birr al-walidain. What they had committed, don't worry. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will basically do the job in al-adl al-ilahi, in the divine justice and in divine accountability. And that's the same thing with other cases of trauma. And especially if we're talking about abuse, we're talking about perhaps maybe you filed a case, a divorce case, because your husband wronged you, or you tried to somehow get justice. They may give you justice, but most of the times, they're not going to give you the justice entirely. Why? Because a lot of those details in that relationship, you either cannot remember all the details, or even if you were to remember all the details, at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that is going to determine the accountability. That's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would have the measurement. Ya Rabbi, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those that do not oppress and are not oppressed. Don't ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be oppressed, because it's a fitna. But ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give you the power, and that you would not an adlima aw udlam, to not be an oppressor and to not be oppressed. An ajhala aw yujhala alayh. You seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from people wronging you, or you being or harming others and basically wronging others. So both basically apply. Okay, let's continue right there. وَلَقَدْ مَكَّنَّاكُمْ. Did I say the details of this one? Yes. وَلَقَدْ مَكَّنَّاكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَجَعَلْنَا لَكُمْ فِيهَا مَعَايِشَ قَلِيلًا مَا تَشْكُرُونَ. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pause right there. Okay, and then inshallah tomorrow we'll continue this one. Okay, from وَلَقَدْ مَكَّنَّاكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. So stay tuned, inshallah, tomorrow. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, inshallah. Unless you want me to continue. Everybody's quiet. Okay, let me just just at least give you kind of like a prelude of what we're going to do. وَلَقَدْ مَكَّنَّاكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. That is related. Every single ayah is related to the previous one. So مَكَّنَّاكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, the root is مَكَّنَا. Just like when you say مَكَّنَا, like a machine. مَكَّنَا, they replace the ka into a sha. Okay, مَكَّنَا. مَكَّنَا actually means to give you the power to do something. And مَكَّنَا, to give you the full empowerment. In other words, think of it as you have the control over everything. So, مَكَّنَا, مَكَّنَّاكُمْ, you all were given the empowerment, the privileges, the tools, the potentials. That's it, tamkeen. Makana, to give you, basically, think of makana as basically the machine or something. Okay, or makana is basically the tool to do something. So makkannakum, and this shadda, makkannakum, whether your potential started out as a child, weak, and then you started growing in your potentials. And once you are probably around 19, 20, now you have potentials to basically, one, you are free on your own, you have different potentials and independence to basically be on your own. What are you going to do with these potentials? Are you going to put them in place? Or what are you going to do with them? So that's basically mekkannakum. So whether it tamkeen happened gradually from early childhood, and the older you get, the more tamkeen you would get, or the more privileges and the better potentials you would grow, or whether makkannakum to basically mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given all the people certain potentials, the potential to see, the potential to hear, the potential to basically maybe have rizq, all of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would each give a certain potential. There's no one with zero potentials. The second that there's no potential or a certain potential is taken away, that's when their accountability would basically minimized according to that. So if a person is majnoon, their accountability is completely taken away. If a person is young, is underage, is they did not reach the age of puberty, then in that situation, their accountability is certainly also taken away. But then if they are with the potential to probably have money, then in that situation, you've got a responsibility and accountability because you have the money. Someone else is probably poor. There's no accountability since you don't have the money. If you had the accountability, probably had maybe social power or social authority or probably a social privilege. You were a principal, or you are probably, at a certain social empowerment, maybe in a government or maybe in some sensitive position, then in that situation, you have a certain responsibility that others might not have. And the list goes on and on. So every single power, every single potential, every single privilege that you would have, that's basically a tamkeen that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you. It was not necessarily as something that you somehow were just so smart to get, but it was something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you, and therefore there's a certain level of accountability for that potential. And certainly, مَكَّنَّاكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, this is the area of accountability. So then we would see that this ayah that came before, وَالْوَزْنُ يَوْمَئِذٍ الْحَقِّ, this is basically the theme, perhaps in the whole surah of Surah Al-A'raf. In Surah Al-A'raf, if you were to summarize the whole center of what the surah is really centered around, it's centered around this statement right here. وَالْوَزْنُ يَوْمَئِذٍ الْحَقِّ. Why? Because you were given tamkeen. And because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you the different instructions on how to deal with such tamkeen within the ayat. And جعلنا لكم فيها معايش قليلا ما تشكرون. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you the different areas, the different corners to basically live, to basically get into the ability to have that free will, and also have the potentials to basically do the behavior, 3 or 2, basically the intention, and 4, the decision in what you want to do. And what decisions you basically carry out. Go ahead, dear.
So التمكين is a kind of توفيق من Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So absolutely, every single tamkeen is tawfiq. Every single tamkeen is basically coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's no question about that. It's coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But tamkeen, there are different kinds of tamkeen. There's a tamkeen that you invest to have. There's another tamkeen that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you naturally. Okay, so when we're talking about the tamkeen, you remember there's when we're speaking about when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا يَرْضَى لِعِبَادِهِ الْكُفْرِ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not accept that people would commit kufr, but at the same time, He gave you the tamkeen to make the decision. But that doesn't mean there's a rida, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we would say that there's the will can be tashri'i and can be kawni. All right, so there's the will that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given in nature. Kawni, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you, hey, you can go choose to decide to pick an apple from the tree, or you could go and probably steal, I don't know, a candy bar from the nearest shop. You had the will to do this or that.
Could Allah put me in a...
Did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give me the tamkeen? Did He give me the potential to actually go steal the candy bar? No, He didn't give you that potential to steal the candy bar, but He gave you the potential to have the ability to go walk, grab, take, eat, and swallow. That's a potential that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you, but that doesn't mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is accepting it. He gave you the potential to be able to practice a certain behavior, all right? But He did not accept that you would put it within that area, all right? So when we speak about الرضا, or we speak about المشيئة, there's المشيئة الكونية and there's المشيئة التشريعية. There are two kinds of مشيئة. There are two kinds of will. The first will is that the will that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given you in terms of tamkeen. He gave you the potential, something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put within nature, something that He put on earth, etc. But that doesn't mean He accepts each and every single will that you make. Your will has to match Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will.
So it's not the position I have it in my life. Allah put me in and I'm hired there. You to use me.
Okay, I see what you're saying. So certainly, if you have a potential to do a good deed, that's the privilege. But do you always have to do that good deed? Let's say I have $50,000. Okay, I can invest maybe $2,000 for maybe an orphanage, or I can decide that no, I can survive on $25,000 and I'll invest $25,000. And I'll invest in $25,000 to be for, let's say, al-akhirah. That's a choice that you can make. Or you can decide that, you know, I already have some saved, I'll donate the whole thing. That's another thing that you would make. But certainly they're not equal. They're not all equal. Each one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you the potential. How are you going to invest that potential? That's another different kind of calculation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course, you don't have to invest in anything in the $50,000. Unless it's zakah, then you certainly have to invest in 2.5% of it. All right? And with certain conditions. If it's zakah, then you're going to have to basically do your zakah by 2.5%.
Okay.
Okay? Then that's a different story.
Inshallah.
But that's the only thing that's obligatory.
Yeah, inshallah.
But other than that, you can decide to further do more. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know, جَعَلْنَا لَكُمْ فِيهَا مَعَايِشْ. There are certain things that, you know, they're basically available to you. Wind is available to you. And subhanAllah, you look at you look at the things that are in the world, all right? You cannot live without air even for 15 minutes, but made air so available that no one can necessarily take out. All right? Because your life depends on it. But then when you look at water, water is way more on earth than food. Because you need more water than food.
Right.
And food, of course, is
Water.
It's in plants, you need more plants than you need animals, and you have more plants. Okay, you have more plants than animals to eat. All right. So you could say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had even divided the ratios in certain ways out of His mercy, that's how much you need water, that's how much you need air. You will die in 15 minutes without air, so I'll make it available all the time. And you need this amount of water, and even the ratio on earth. I know not all the water on earth is necessarily drinkable water, but at the end of the day, it comes down as rain, comes down as, you know, in different ways, and basically to serve you. All right, so that's it, tamkeen.
Yeah, inshallah. Inshallah, tomorrow we'll discuss it more.
Inshallah. قليلا ما تشكرون. Inshallah, we'll discuss it more. Why قليلا ما تشكرون? We'll see it. خلقناكم ثم صورناكم ثم قلنا للملائكة اسجدوا لآدم سجدوا إلا إبليس. Inshallah, we'll discuss it more tomorrow.
And also, I have another question about the paragraph before this, but I'll not take time from you today. Let's tomorrow, inshallah.
Inshallah. Inshallah.
Jazakallah.
Inshallah. All right. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. See you all tomorrow. السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.